close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the deepest winter night you've ever experienced. The kind where frost creeps across windows like skeletal fingers, where your breath crystallizes in the air, where the cold doesn't just chill your skin, but seems to seep into your very bones. Now imagine looking up at that black sky and seeing them. Riders, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, mounted on skeletal steeds, clad in armor of bone and shadow and ancient malice. They gallop across the heavens in a terrible procession, and where they pass, warmth dies, hope dies. People vanish, snatched from their beds, their fields, their lives, never to return. This is the Wild Hunt, and they are not a myth. For centuries, the common folk of the continent whispered their name with dread. Farmers would cross themselves and bar their doors when dark clouds gathered unnaturally fast. Mothers would pull their children close when the wind howled with voices that weren't quite wind. Soldiers who had faced down armies without flinching would go pale at the mere mention of the wraiths of Morhog, the spectral riders whose appearance heralded war, death, and catastrophe. But what the people believed was wrong. Oh, the terror was justified, the fear well-founded. But the truth behind the Wild Hunt is stranger, darker, and infinitely more complex than any folktale could capture. Because they aren't ghosts, they aren't demons, they aren't even from this world. They are elves, ancient, powerful, desperate elves from a dying dimension, led by a king whose ambition and fear have twisted him into something that makes even monsters seem merciful. They are the Aen Elle, the older folk, and their story stretches across multiple worlds, spans thousands of years, and culminates in a hunt for one girl whose blood carries the power to save or damn entire realities. Tonight, we trace their history from the moment worlds collided to the final battle that would determine the fate of countless dimensions. We will walk through their shining capital of Tir Nalia, witness the catastrophe that separated worlds and peoples, follow their raids across realities as they built an empire on slavery and suffering. We will meet Eredin Break Glass, the king of the Wild Hunt, a warrior of legendary skill and ruthless pragmatism whose every action is calculated to save his people, no matter the cost to others. We will uncover the tragedy of Lara Doran and understand why one elven woman's forbidden love centuries ago made a young girl named Cyrilla the most valuable prize in the multiverse. This is not a simple story of heroes and villains. The Wild Hunt are conquerors, slavers, kidnappers. They have caused immeasurable suffering across countless worlds. And yet, they are also a dying people, watching their reality freeze into eternal winter, desperately seeking any means of survival. Their actions are monstrous, their motivations are understandable, and that complexity is what makes them fascinating. So settle in. This tale will take us from the highest towers of an elven civilization at its zenith to the frozen wasteland of a world consumed by apocalyptic cold. From ancient folklore that inspired legends across our own world to the deeply personal story of one witcher's impossible choice between the woman he loves and the girl who has become his daughter in all but blood. From the moment universes crash together in cataclysmic chaos to to the final confrontation between a monster hunter and a king who has already lost everything. The wild hunt is coming, and before we're done, you'll understand what that truly means. Chapter 1: Echoes of Ancient Mythology. Before we dive into the specific lore of the Witcher universe, we need to understand something important. Andrzej Sapkowski didn't invent the wild hunt from nothing. He drew from a deep well of European folklore, a mythology so ancient and widespread that versions of it appear across nearly every culture in Northern Europe. And understanding these real-world legends helps us appreciate how Sapkowski transformed them into something uniquely his own. The wild hunt, in its various forms, appears in German, Scandinavian, Celtic, and Slavic folklore. The details vary by region and tradition, but certain elements remain constant. A group of supernatural riders, often led by a powerful figure, galloping across the night sky. The sound of their passage, the baying of hounds, the thunder of hooves that aren't quite hooves, the terror they inspire in those who witness them, and most importantly, the consequences of seeing them, which usually involve death, misfortune, or being swept up to join the hunt yourself. In Germanic tradition, the wild hunt is often called the wilde Jagd or wütendes Heer, the furious host. It's led by Wotan, the German equivalent of the Norse god Odin, and consists of the souls of the dead, warriors who fell in battle and now ride eternally through the skies. To see the hunt is an omen of war or plague. To be caught outside when it passes is to risk being taken, forced to join the procession of spirits, riding forever in service to gods and forces beyond mortal understanding. The Norse had their own version naturally. Odin's wild hunt, Oscaré or Osgårdsreir, consists of the Einherjar, the chosen warriors who died gloriously in battle and were brought to Valhalla. They ride out during the darkest part of winter, between Yule and the New Year, when the barrier between the living world and the realm of the dead grows thin. The hunt serves as a reminder that death is always present, always waiting, and that winter itself is a kind of death that must be endured before rebirth can occur. In Celtic mythology, particularly in Wales, the hunt is led by Gwyn ap Nudd, king of the Tylwyth Teg, the fair folk. His Ciwn, Anwan, the hounds of Anwan, hunt the souls of the damned across the night sky. Their howling is said to grow quieter as they draw nearer, which is backwards from how normal hounds sound. This reversal of natural law emphasizes their supernatural nature. They are not of this world, and normal rules do not apply to them. The English have Herne the Hunter, a spectral figure said to haunt Windsor Forest, leading his phantom hunters in pursuit of both living and dead. He appears in Shakespeare's The Merry Wives of Windsor, which gives you an idea of how deeply embedded this mythology was in the cultural consciousness. Herne is often depicted with antlers, connecting him to older pagan traditions of horned gods and nature spirits. Even the French have their Mené Delaquin, the Harlequin's household, a procession of tormented souls making their way through the night. The name Harlequin may have connections to Harlequin, the theatrical character, suggesting that even comedy and performance art have roots in these ancient legends of supernatural riders. What's fascinating is how consistent certain themes remain across all these variations. First, the hunt appears primarily in winter, during the darkest and coldest part of the year. This association with winter and death is fundamental. Second, seeing the hunt is always significant, never casual. It's an omen, a warning, a brush with powers beyond mortal comprehension. Third, the hunt takes people. Not everyone, but some unlucky souls are swept up and carried away, either joining the hunt or simply vanishing forever. And fourth, most importantly, there's an element of justice or cosmic balance to many versions. The hunt doesn't just rampage randomly. It punishes the wicked, collects those who are due, maintains order between the worlds of living and dead. It's terrifying, yes, but it serves a purpose in the great scheme of things. Sapkowski, being the brilliant writer and folklorist he is, took all of these elements and asked a simple but profound question. What if the wild hunt wasn't supernatural at all? What if there was a rational, albeit fantastical, explanation? What if those spectral riders were actually beings from another dimension, using technology or magic advanced enough to seem like gods or ghosts to those who witnessed them? And more than that, what if their motives weren't mysterious or cosmic, but desperately pragmatic? What if they weren't punishing the wicked or maintaining cosmic balance, but simply trying to survive? What if everything terrifying about them, from their ghastly appearance to their practice of taking people, could be explained not by divine purpose or supernatural evil, but by the actions of a civilization doing whatever it takes to keep existing? This is the genius of Sapkowski's Wild Hunt. He preserved the folklore, the imagery, the terror. A cavalcade of skeletal riders galloping through winter skies. The sound of their approach, the disappearances, the omens of war and destruction, all of that remains intact. But underneath, he built a science fiction foundation. These aren't spirits, they're interdimensional raiders. They aren't collecting souls for otherworldly judgment. They're kidnapping slaves. They aren't serving some cosmic purpose. They're desperately trying to save their dying world by any means necessary. The Slavic traditions are particularly relevant here, since Sapkowski is Polish and would have grown up steeped in these legends. In Polish folklore, the Dziki Gon, or Dziki Wolf, appears during winter storms, a procession of the dead led by various figures depending on the region. The emphasis on winter, on the cold, on the association with death and the end of things, all of this feeds directly into how the Wild Hunt functions in the Witcher universe. What Sapkowski did was take the poetry of folklore and give it the structure of speculative fiction. The Wild Hunt in his universe has ships, the Naglfar, named after the ship of Norse mythology, said to be made from the fingernails of the dead and destined to carry the forces of chaos during Ragnarok. They have armor and weapons, hierarchies and strategies. They're soldiers, not spirits. But they understand the power of fear, the advantage of being mistaken for something supernatural, and they use their reputation deliberately. This blending of folklore and science fiction creates something uniquely powerful. When characters in the Witcher universe see the Wild Hunt, they're seeing something that their ancestors have feared for generations, something that carries the weight of centuries of stories and warnings. But they're also seeing something real, something that can be understood, fought, potentially defeated. The terror is justified by both tradition and reality, and this is crucial for understanding everything that follows. The Wild Hunt isn't evil in the sense that demons or dark gods are evil. They're not trying to destroy the world for the sake of destruction or corrupt souls for the fun of it. They're a civilization in crisis, led by individuals willing to do terrible things to ensure their people's survival. They're colonizers, slave takers, conquerors. They operate with ruthless efficiency and zero empathy for those they victimize. But they're not monsters. They're people, extremely powerful, extremely dangerous people with access to technology that lets them travel between dimensions and appear as nightmares made manifest. People whose world is dying and who have concluded that their survival justifies any action, no matter how horrific. That moral complexity is what elevates the Wild Hunt from simple antagonists to genuinely compelling figures in the Witcher saga. And it all starts with Sapkowski's decision to take ancient folklore seriously, to treat it not as primitive superstition, but as the cultural memory of something that actually happened, something that continues to happen, something that has shaped the history and fears of entire civilizations. So when you hear about the Wild Hunt in the Witcher universe, remember that you're hearing an echo of stories told around fires for thousands of years, stories that warn children to stay inside during winter storms, stories that explained why people sometimes vanished without a trace, stories that tried to make sense of a world where powerful forces beyond human understanding could reach out and change your life, end your life, steal you away to somewhere you'd never return from. The folklore was preparing us for the truth, and the truth, as we're about to discover, is both more mundane and more terrible than any legend could capture. Chapter 2. The Aen Elle and Tir na Lie. Long before humans learned to make fire, before dwarves carved their first halls in mountain stone, before the continent as we know it even existed, there were the elves. Not one race, but many branches scattered across the multiverse, each adapting to their chosen worlds, developing their own cultures and priorities. And among these scattered kindred, perhaps none achieved such heights of power and sophistication as the Aen Elle, the older folk, the people of the Alders, who came to rule a world of their own with unquestioned supremacy. Their capital is Tir na Lia, a name drawn from Irish mythology's Tir na Nog, the land of youth, that otherworldly paradise where the Tuatha De Danann dwelt in eternal splendor. The name is fitting. Tir na Lia is a city of impossible beauty, the kind of place that exists more in dreams than reality, that seems too perfect, too ethereal, too flawlessly crafted to be the work of mortal hands. Even Cyrilla, who has walked through countless worlds and seen wonders beyond imagining, finds herself awed by it. The buildings of Tir na Lia are architectural poetry. Light, open on all sides, resembling gazebos or arbors, they seem to float rather than stand. Constructed of marble, alabaster, and malachite, adorned with stucco, terracotta, and intricate mosaics. Each structure is a work of art. The city is all bridges and terraces, peristyles and cloisters, balconies that overlook gardens where flowers bloom in colors that don't quite exist in the mortal world. Sculptures and monuments fill every plaza, celebrating elven heroes, commemorating victories, embodying ideals of beauty and power that the Aen Elle have cultivated over millennia. The river Eresnad runs through the heart of the city, its waters clear and swift, crossed by bridges of such delicate design that they appear to be made of light rather than stone. Everything about Tir na Lia speaks of a civilization at its peak, confident in its power, secure in its superiority, creating beauty because it can, because beauty is what separates the civilized from the barbaric, the Aen Elle from the lesser races that exist to serve them. Because make no mistake, the Aen Elle are not the noble, nature-loving elves of Tolkien-esque fantasy. They are conquerors, they are slavers, they are a civilization built on the subjugation of other races, maintained through military might and casual cruelty, justified by an absolute conviction in their own superiority. They are, in many ways, the dark reflection of what elven supremacy looks like when taken to its logical extreme. When the Aen Elle arrived in this world, it was already inhabited. Humans lived there. Unicorns too, those ancient beings of incredible power who possess natural abilities to traverse dimensions and time itself. The Aen Elle response to finding their new home occupied was not diplomacy or coexistence. It was war. Total, merciless war. They exterminated the human population, not enslaved them, not conquered them, but systematically eradicated them from existence. Mountains of human bones can be found in certain places in the Aen Elle world, silent testimony to genocide on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. Whether this was revenge for what happened to the Ensei on the continent, who were gradually displaced and oppressed by human expansion, or simply pragmatic elimination of potential rivals, the result was the same. The humans died, all of them. The unicorns proved more difficult. Beings of immense power, capable of things even Aen Elle sages could barely comprehend. They couldn't be destroyed outright. So a state of perpetual war exists between the Aen Elle and the unicorns, a conflict that has lasted for uncounted generations and shows no sign of resolution. The unicorns remember the genocide. They remember what the Aen Elle did to this world's original inhabitants, and they fight to prevent it from happening again, to anyone, anywhere. This capacity for casual genocide, for species-wide extinction, carried out with methodical efficiency, tells us something crucial about Aen Elle culture. They don't see other races as equals or even as potentially equal. They see them as resources, obstacles, or inconveniences. A human is valuable only as a slave. A unicorn is valuable only if its power can be controlled and harnessed. Nothing else matters. The king of the Aen Elle, Oberon Muirsetach, rules from Tir na Lia with the weight of over 650 years of experience. He is an Aen Seivhern, an elven sage, a magician of unparalleled power and knowledge. But by the time we encounter him in the story, Oberon has become distant, melancholic, disconnected from the day-to-day governance of his people. He rules in name, but in practice, two others have taken over actual control. Avalarch and Aen Elle, like Oberon, serves as the knowing one, the sage whose knowledge and foresight guide policy. He is ancient beyond measure, patient beyond human comprehension, and utterly dedicated to a single goal: preserving and strengthening the elder blood through careful genetic manipulation spanning generations. Avalarch plays the long game, thinking in terms of centuries and bloodlines, treating individuals as components in vast genealogical equations. And then there's Eredin Glass, the Sparrowhawk, general of the Aen Elle forces and commander of the Red Riders. If Avalarch represents the intellectual power of the Aen Elle, Eredin represents their martial prowess. He is a warrior of legendary skill, a strategist, a leader who commands absolute loyalty from his soldiers. And he is ambitious, hungrier for power than his position technically allows, impatient with Oberon's passivity and Avalarch's gradual approach. These two, the sage and the warrior, the patient planner and the decisive actor, effectively rule the Aen Elle between them. Oberon provides legitimacy and continuity, but Avalarch and Eredin make the actual decisions. And their approaches, while different in method, share one common element. They will do absolutely anything to ensure the survival and dominance of their people. The Aen Elle possess technology and magic far beyond what exists on the continent. They have mastered dimensional travel, at least to some degree. They have ships like the Naglfar that can sail between worlds. They have armor and weapons crafted from materials and techniques lost to other civilizations. Their mages can perform feats that continental sorcerers consider impossible. And most importantly, they have time. Elves are functionally immortal. Not truly immortal. They can be killed, but they don't age in the way humans do. An elf of 200 years might still be considered young. 600 years, like Oberon, is ancient, but not unheard of. This longevity gives them perspective that humans lack, but it also creates problems. Their birth rate is extremely low. Elven couples might have one child over the course of centuries. Population growth happens on geological timescales. This makes every elf precious, but also makes their civilization inherently vulnerable to any kind of catastrophic loss. It also affects their psychology in subtle ways. When you have centuries to pursue a goal, urgency becomes foreign. Why rush when you have time? But this patience can become paralysis. Oberon's melancholy, his disengagement, reflects this problem. What's the point of action when you've already seen centuries pass? What's the point of change when everything eventually reverts to familiar patterns? The Aen Elle language, called Elilon, is a variant of Elder speech, that ancient tongue shared by all elven peoples across the multiverse. But just as the Aen Elle themselves have diverged from their Aen Seide cousins on the continent, so too has their language evolved in unique directions. They retain the formal elegance, the precise grammar, the poetic structure, but they've added elements reflecting their own experiences, their own world, their own priorities. Their society is rigidly hierarchical. The Aen Elle, the sages, sit at the top, repositories of knowledge and magical power. Below them are the nobility, families whose bloodlines stretch back to the founding of Aen Elle. Then come the soldiers, the Red Riders and regular military, respected for their skill, but ultimately servants of those above. And at the bottom, invisible in the city's beauty, are the slaves. Humans captured from other worlds, brought back through dimensional portals, put to work in tasks deemed beneath elven attention. The slaves live and die outside the narrative that the Aen Elle tell themselves. In their story, they are the pinnacle of civilization, the rightful masters of all they survey, the inheritors of elven destiny. The slaves are just tools, no more significant than the stones that make up their buildings. This willful blindness, this capacity to simply not see the suffering they inflict, is perhaps their most damning characteristic. What's fascinating about the Aen Elle is that they're not portrayed as one-dimensionally evil. Individual Aen Elle can be charming, intelligent, even kind within the limits of their cultural assumptions. Avalach genuinely cares about preserving elven heritage and genuinely believes his genetic programs serve a higher purpose. Eredin is loyal to his people, brave in battle, and willing to sacrifice everything for what he sees as their survival. Even Oberon, distant and melancholic as he is, carries the weight of ruling an entire civilization for centuries. But their culture is built on monstrous foundations. And when that culture faces existential threat, when their world begins to die, their response is not to change, not to question, not to seek some other way. Their response is to double down, to become even more ruthless, to decide that if they must commit atrocities to survive, then atrocities are what they'll commit. Aen Elle is beautiful. The Aen Elle are sophisticated, cultured, powerful, and they are slavers, genocidal conquerors, being so convinced of their own superiority that they literally cannot see the humanity in those they oppress. This contradiction is not accidental. Sapkowski is showing us that evil doesn't require ugliness, that terrible things can be done by people who appreciate art and beauty, who create wonders even as they perpetrate horrors. The Aen Elle are the wild hunt, and understanding them, understanding their world, their culture, their history, is essential to understanding why they do what they do, why they pursue Cyrilla with such relentless determination, why they're willing to risk everything in a desperate gambit to escape the fate that awaits their dimension. But before we can talk about their desperate flight from doom, we need to understand the event that changed everything, the cataclysm that separated worlds and trapped peoples far from their origins, the cosmic collision that created the continent as we know it and made the Wild Hunt's eternal raids possible in the first place. We need to talk about the conjunction of the spheres. Chapter 3. The conjunction of the spheres. Imagine the multiverse as a vast ocean, and each reality as a bubble floating in that ocean. Most of the time, these bubbles drift separate from each other, each containing its own universe with its own laws, its own inhabitants, its own history. Sometimes bubbles float close together, close enough that beings with sufficient power or technology might be able to cross from one to another, but mostly they remain distinct, separate, parallel. Now imagine something massive disturbing that ocean, an event so catastrophic, so powerful, that bubbles that had drifted separately for eons suddenly slam together. Membranes that separated realities become permeable. Barriers that kept dimensions distinct collapse. And for a terrible, glorious, chaotic moment, everything is connected to everything else. Creatures from one world find themselves in another. Magic from different systems suddenly mix. Species that evolved in isolation are thrust together. Reality itself becomes fluid. This is the conjunction of the spheres, and it happened approximately 1,500 years before Geralt of Rivia took his first contract as a witcher. Nobody knows what caused it. Not the elven sages with their millennia of accumulated knowledge. Not the human mages with their obsessive study of magical phenomena. Not even the dragons, those ancient beings who remember things no other race recalls. The conjunction simply happened, a cosmic event that reshaped the multiverse and whose after effects still define the world of The Witcher. Before the conjunction, the continent was a vastly different place. Gnomes were the original inhabitants, the first sentient species to develop on this world. They built their own civilizations, small and precise and orderly. Then came the dwarves, migrating from somewhere else, displacing or absorbing the gnomish cultures, establishing themselves as the dominant power. For ages, the continent belonged to dwarves. Then the elves arrived, not through the conjunction, but before it, sailing across the ocean in white ships, arriving on the continent's western shores. These were the Ensei, elves who had left their original homeworld for reasons lost to time, seeking new lands, finding the continent, and claiming it. They brought magic, culture, and a conviction in their own superiority. The dwarves, practical and pragmatic, made accommodations. They couldn't stop the elven expansion, but they could negotiate, survive, maintain their strongholds in the mountains, while the elves claimed the forests and plains. This was the world into which the conjunction erupted. Stable, old, set in its ways, about to be shattered forever. When the conjunction occurred, rifts opened across the continent. Portals, gateways, tiers in reality itself, allowing things through, horrible things. Monsters that had evolved in dimensions where different laws applied, where hunger and violence were the only constants. Ghouls, creatures that feast on corpses. Graveres, their larger, more vicious cousins. Vampires of various sorts, from the bestial Echimara to the sophisticated higher vampires who possess intelligence and magic, rivaling any mage. These creatures didn't belong in this world. They had no ecological niche, no natural place in the continent's ecosystem. They were invasive species on a catastrophic scale, predators without natural checks, horrors that could devastate entire regions before anyone figured out how to fight them. The elves and dwarves, caught completely unprepared, suddenly found themselves battling for survival against threats they barely understood. But monsters weren't the only things that came through the conjunction. Humans arrived, specifically, according to historical accounts, two groups initially, the Dauk and the Wasgor peoples. These were humans whose own world had been destroyed, who found themselves stranded on the continent with no way home. They were refugees, desperate, frightened, armed with nothing but their will to survive. The Dauk and Wasgor would eventually die out or be absorbed into later human cultures, particularly the Nordlings, who would come to dominate the northern kingdoms. But in those early days after the conjunction, they were the first humans to set foot on this world. And humans do survive. That's what they're good at. They reproduce faster than elves, who might have one child per century. They adapt faster than dwarves, who prefer stability and tradition. They're violent when necessary, cooperative when advantageous, and utterly relentless in their expansion. Within generations, the human population grew from a few scattered bands of refugees to established settlements. Within a few more generations, those settlements became kingdoms. The conjunction also brought chaos magic into the world, at least according to human understanding. The reality is more complex. Elves had magic before the conjunction, sophisticated and powerful magic tied to their long history and natural abilities. But what humans call chaos, that wild, dangerous, immensely powerful force that can reshape reality with a thought and a word, that seems to have appeared during or after the conjunction. Or perhaps it was always there, and the conjunction simply made it accessible to species that hadn't been able to touch it before. The mechanics remain unclear, debated by scholars and mages who lack sufficient information to reach definitive conclusions. What's certain is that after the conjunction, humans learned to wield chaos, transforming themselves from refugees into rivals. The first human mages appeared, crude at first, compared to elven sophistication, but powerful nonetheless, powerful enough to change the balance of power on the continent forever. For the Aen Elle, the conjunction was catastrophic, but in different ways. Their world wasn't destroyed by monsters. They were powerful enough, militarily and magically, to handle any beast that came through. Their problem was more fundamental. The conjunction disrupted their ability to travel between dimensions. Before the conjunction, the Aen Elle possessed something called the Ard Gaith, the Gate of the Worlds. This was either technology or magic, or some combination of both, that allowed them to open portals to other realities with relative ease. They could raid other worlds, take slaves, steal resources, and return home safely. The gate was central to their power, to their economy, to their entire way of life. The conjunction broke it. Not completely, not immediately, but damaged it in fundamental ways. Opening portals became harder, more dangerous, less reliable. The easy access they'd enjoyed was gone. They could still travel between worlds, but it required navigators, specialized mages who could find paths through the chaos the conjunction had created. And even then, they could only move small groups. The days of bringing back hundreds of slaves at a time were over. This limitation was existential. The Aen Elle economy depended on slavery. Their society was structured around having an underclass to perform all labor deemed beneath elven dignity. Without the gate, operating at full capacity, they couldn't maintain their supply of slaves, and without slaves, their entire social structure began to crack. Even worse, the conjunction separated the Aen Elle from the Aen Elle. Before, they were distant cousins who could occasionally interact. After, they were cut off, living in separate dimensions with only the most tenuous connections possible. The Aen Elle on the continent found themselves isolated, watching their elven kin disappear, left to face human expansion alone. For the Aen Elle, the conjunction brought both monsters and the humans who would eventually displace them. The wars that followed were long and bitter. Elves, who had ruled the continent for over 2,000 years, gradually lost ground to human kingdoms. Their population, always growing slowly, couldn't keep pace with human reproduction. Their magic, sophisticated and powerful, couldn't compensate for simple numerical disadvantage. By the time of Geralt's life, elves on the continent are second-class citizens at best, hunted rebels at worst, a dying people watching their culture vanish. The conjunction created the witches too, though indirectly. The monsters that came through the rifts needed to be fought. Normal soldiers weren't sufficient. The creatures were too strong, too fast, too alien in their biology. So mages developed the process that created witches, taking children and subjecting them to mutations, transforming them into something more than human, less than human, different from human. Beings specifically engineered to hunt monsters, enhanced with alchemy and magic to match the supernatural threats they faced. The creation of witches is itself controversial, a topic of moral debate in universe. The process kills most who undergo it. Those who survive are sterile, stripped of normal human emotional ranges, forever marked as mutants, as other. They're necessary perhaps, but they're also tragic figures, children sacrificed to create weapons against threats that only exist because reality itself shattered. Everything about the continent, as Geralt knows it, stems from the conjunction. The political situation with humans dominant and elder races oppressed. The existence of monsters requiring specialized hunters. The proliferation of magic and mages. The wars, the kingdoms, the entire social structure. All of it traces back to that moment when worlds collided and nothing was ever the same again. And for the Aen Elle, the conjunction marked the beginning of their decline. They didn't know it then, couldn't see it yet, but the seeds were planted. Their easy dominance was over, their gate was broken. And though they could still raid other worlds, still take slaves, still maintain their empire, it was harder now, more dangerous, more costly. They were no longer ascendant, they were merely surviving. And survival, as they would learn, requires increasingly desperate measures. But they adapted. Of course, they adapted. The Aen Elle are nothing if not pragmatic. If the gate no longer worked properly, they'd find other ways. If they couldn't bring back hundreds of slaves at once, they'd make do with smaller numbers. If traveling between dimensions was now dangerous and difficult, they'd turn that danger into a weapon, using the fear they inspired to make their raids even more effective. They became the Wild Hunt. And in becoming monsters in the eyes of others, they perhaps became monsters in truth. Chapter 4. Birth of the Red Riders. In the aftermath of the conjunction, with their gate of the worlds damaged but not destroyed, with their ability to travel between dimensions diminished but not eliminated, the Aen Elle faced a choice. They could accept their new limitations, adapt their society to function without the constant influx of slaves from other worlds, find a new way to maintain their civilization. Or they could refuse to change. They could cling to what they'd always been, what they believed themselves entitled to be. They could continue their raids, their conquests, their harvesting of lesser races for labor and service. It would be harder now, more dangerous, but it could be done. All it required was sufficient ruthlessness and a willingness to become even more fearsome than before. King Oberon Muirsitak chose the second path, and to implement that choice, he created the Deag Ruadri, the Red Riders. The name itself is revealing. Red, the color of blood and war and sunset skies. Red, the color that stands out against snow and ice. Red, the color that warns of danger, that marks things as deadly. The Deag Ruadri were designed to be an elite force, the best warriors the Aen Elle could produce, trained specifically for interdimensional raids, equipped with the finest weapons and armor, led by the most capable commanders available, and given to Eredin Breac Glass to lead. Eredin was already a general, already distinguished in service to Oberon. He possessed the combination of qualities the position required: martial skill, strategic intelligence, and the capacity for absolute ruthlessness. The Red Riders needed to be more than just soldiers. They needed to be symbols, embodiments of terror, living nightmares that would make entire worlds tremble at their approach. Eredin understood this. He understood that fear is a weapon, perhaps the most effective weapon of all. So the Red Riders became the Wild Hunt. They didn't call themselves that, not initially. That name came from their victims, from the people who saw them appear in the skies and recognized the folklore, the ancient stories of spectral riders heralding doom. But the Aen Elle encouraged the identification. They crafted their appearance deliberately to evoke those legends, to make themselves seem supernatural rather than merely alien. The armor was the first element. Instead of the elegant, artful designs typical of Aen Elle craftwork, the Red Riders wore skeletal armor designed to look like bones and death, helms shaped like skulls, chest pieces that evoked rib cages, gauntlets that appeared to be skeletal hands. The effect was deliberate and devastating. When you saw a Red Rider, you didn't see an elf in fancy armor. You saw death itself riding toward you on a steed that seemed to be made of shadow and malice. The horses, or what appeared to be horses, were similarly crafted. Whether they were actual animals from the Aen Elle world or constructs created through magic, they were presented as skeletal, nightmarish things. When the hunt rode, it didn't look like cavalry. It looked like the dead themselves had risen and taken mount. They even altered their voices. Natural elven voices, while beautiful, weren't sufficiently terrifying. So the Red Riders used magic or technology to distort their speech, making it echo and resonate in unnatural ways, like voices from the grave, like wind through tombs. When an Aen Elle warrior spoke in his normal voice, you heard elegance and sophistication. When a Red Rider spoke, You heard your death pronouncing your name. This transformation from soldiers to symbols was remarkably effective. The wild hunt became legend, became nightmare, became something that parents threatened children with to ensure good behavior. Behave, or the wild hunt will take you in the night. It was said so often, in so many languages, across so many worlds, that it became a universal constant. Everywhere the Aen Elle raided, the legend grew. Their strategy was brutal in its simplicity. They would appear suddenly, materializing through portals opened by their navigator mages. A village at night, a city during winter storms, any place where people would be vulnerable and unprepared. The hunt would descend from the sky, a cavalcade of skeletal riders with weapons drawn and purposes clear. They would take people, particularly children and young adults, those strong enough to work but young enough to be broken into obedience. Sometimes they killed, but rarely. Death wasn't the point. Terror was the point. Control was the point. They wanted witnesses, survivors who could spread the story, who could tell others what they'd seen. Each raid reinforced the legend, made the hunt seem more powerful, more inevitable, more supernatural. And supernatural enemies cannot be fought by conventional means. Supernatural enemies must simply be endured. The victims they took back to the Aen Elle world faced slavery, not euphemistic servitude, but actual slavery in its most brutal form. Forced labor, often in terrible conditions, worked until exhaustion or death. The Aen Elle had no use for weak slaves, so those who couldn't keep up were disposed of without ceremony. The mountains of human bones that Ciri would later discover were the accumulated result of centuries of this practice. Generation after generation of slaves worked to death and discarded like refuse. Some victims managed to escape. Somehow, impossibly, they found ways back through the dimensions to their home worlds. But when they returned, they discovered that time moved differently between realities. Months for them had been decades in their original world. Their families were old or dead. Their homes were gone. Their entire lives had passed without them. And when they tried to tell their stories, they were dismissed as mad. Tales of elven worlds with unicorns and impossible beauty were obviously the delusions of disturbed minds. This time dilation effect was another weapon in the hunt's arsenal. It meant that even if someone escaped and returned home, they couldn't effectively warn others. They couldn't mobilize resistance. They could only be tragic figures, broken by their experiences, unable to make anyone believe what had happened to them. The hunt operated with impunity because even their victims couldn't mount effective opposition. But the Red Riders weren't just raiders. They were also explorers, scouts, intelligence gatherers. Each raid taught them about the worlds they visited, what resources existed there, what military capabilities the inhabitants possessed, what potential threats they might represent. The hunt was mapping the multiverse, identifying targets, planning long-term exploitation. They discovered the continent, the world of the Aen Elle, their distant cousins, now isolated by the conjunction, living in uneasy coexistence with the human kingdoms that had grown powerful in the centuries since the cataclysm. For the Aen Elle, this was perfect. A world they could reach relatively easily, thanks to the shared connection between NC and Aen Elle, a world with plenty of humans, the Aen Elle's preferred source of slave labor, a world where their reputation didn't yet exist, where they could establish the legend of the Wild Hunt fresh and terrible. So they raided the continent, not constantly, not in overwhelming force, but regularly enough to establish their presence. Villages in Skellige, where they became known as the Wraiths of Morhog. Towns in Nilfgaard, where folk tales spoke of the spectral riders. Regions of the northern kingdoms, where the Wild Hunt became as much a part of winter as snow and cold itself. They took people, dozens at a time, and vanished back into their own dimension, leaving only terror and loss behind. The Red Riders developed their own culture within Aen Elle society. They were an elite, privileged, but also apart. Regular elves lived lives of art and philosophy and slow-moving politics. The Red Riders lived for war, for the raids, for the hunt itself. They were respected, feared even by their own people, because what they did required a kind of ruthlessness that even slave-holding Aen Elle found disturbing. Eredin commanded absolute loyalty from his riders. He led from the front, never asking them to take risks he wouldn't take himself. He was a brilliant tactician, able to assess a situation instantly and exploit any weakness. And he was utterly dedicated to Aen Elle survival, believing genuinely that whatever the Red Riders did, whatever atrocities they committed, was justified by the need to preserve their civilization. This belief wasn't entirely wrong from a certain perspective. The Aen Elle genuinely needed slaves to maintain their society. They'd built an entire civilization around not having to perform their own labor. Without slaves, everything would collapse. Food production, infrastructure maintenance, all the unglamorous work that keeps any society functioning, the Aen Elle had outsourced to captured humans. Lose that slave workforce, and the entire elegant structure of Tir na Lia would crumble. But of course, this reveals the fundamental rot at the heart of Aen Elle's civilization. They'd made themselves dependent on slavery, structured everything around exploitation, and now found themselves trapped by their own choices. They couldn't change because change would require admitting that their entire way of life was built on evil. Easier, much easier, to continue as they were, to tell themselves that might makes right, that superior beings have the right to rule inferior ones, that the suffering they caused was regrettable but necessary. The Red Riders were the sharp edge of that philosophy. They were what Aen Elle's supremacy looked like when you stripped away the art and beauty and philosophical justifications. They were soldiers doing a job, a terrible job, but one their civilization required. And they did it with legendary efficiency. For centuries, this system worked. The Wild Hunt raided, took slaves, maintained the Aen Elle way of life. Eredin rose in power and influence, becoming more than just a general, becoming a symbol of Aen Elle military might. The Red Riders became legendary across multiple worlds, feared everywhere they appeared, and the Aen Elle continued their elegant existence, secure in Tir na Lia, believing themselves untouchable, convinced their superiority would endure forever. But forever is a long time. And no civilization, no matter how powerful, no matter how sophisticated, is immune to catastrophe. The Aen Elle had survived the conjunction, adapted to its disruptions, continued to thrive in their own way. But the multiverse is a dangerous place, full of forces even elven sages don't fully understand. And one of those forces was about to reach their world. It was called the White Frost, and it would change everything. Chapter 5. Eredin, Break. Gla, the king of the hunt. To understand the wild hunt, you must understand Eredin. He is their leader, their symbol, the mind behind their strategies, and the will that drives them forward. Without Eredin, the Red Riders might still be a formidable military force. With him, they become something more, something that transcends simple martial prowess and enters the realm of legend and nightmare. Eredin Break Glass. The name itself carries weight. Glass means blue-green in Elder speech, like the color of certain sea ice, like frost on metal. Break is more complex, suggesting something broken or fractured, though the full etymology is debated by scholars. The unicorns, those ancient enemies of the Aen Elle, call him sparrowhawk, a predatory bird, small but fierce, capable of surprising violence. Not much is known about Eredin's early life. The games and books give us only fragments, glimpses of a past that remains largely obscured. We know he was always military, always oriented toward combat and strategy, rather than the philosophical pursuits valued by other Aen Elle. We know he rose through the ranks with remarkable speed, demonstrating talents that made him stand out even among a people who valued excellence. We know Oberon recognized his value and gave him command of the Deag Ruadri, a position of immense trust and terrible responsibility. What we see in Eredin throughout the stories is a man, or rather an elf, of absolute conviction. He believes without question in Aen Elle superiority. He believes their way of life is worth preserving at any cost. He believes that lesser races exist to serve superior ones, that might gives rights, that sentimentality is weakness. These aren't cruel beliefs to him. They're simply truth, as obvious as the sky being above and the ground below. This makes him dangerous in ways more complex than simple villainy. Eredin isn't sadistic. He doesn't enjoy suffering for its own sake. When the Red Riders take slaves, when they kill those who resist, when they spread terror across multiple worlds, Eredin sees this as pragmatic necessity, not evil. He's doing what his people require. That the methods are brutal is regrettable, but irrelevant. What matters is results. In the novels, Eredin's character is somewhat different than in the games. Sapkowski presents him as more of a cipher, a figure seen primarily through Ciri's eyes during her time in Tirnalia. He's intimidating, certainly, and clearly dangerous, but also oddly attractive in the way powerful, confident beings often are. He flirts with Ciri, plays on her attraction to him, uses charm as readily as threat. It's manipulation, calculated and cold, but delivered with sufficient warmth that Ciri doesn't fully recognize the danger until too late. The games, particularly The Witcher 3, expand Eredin into a more fully realized antagonist. Here he's older, wearier, driven by urgency that borders on desperation. His world is dying, consumed by the white frost, and he knows that without drastic action, everything the Aen Elle have built will be lost. So he becomes more ruthless, more willing to take risks, more determined to capture Ciri regardless of cost. CD Projekt Red's Eredin is a warrior king in the truest sense. He's shown leading his forces personally, fighting in the most dangerous battles, never asking his warriors to do what he won't do himself. His armor is the most elaborate, the most fearsome, designed to be recognizable instantly. When Eredin rides, you know it's him. You know the king of the Wild Hunt has taken the field, and that knowledge itself is a weapon. His voice, as portrayed in the games, is remarkable. Stephen Hartley delivers it with a kind of cold, measured intensity that makes even simple statements sound like threats. Eredin doesn't rant or rage. He speaks calmly, with absolute confidence, secure in his power and utterly convinced of his rightness. When he tells Geralt that he will take Ciri, that nothing can stop the Wild Hunt, that resistance is futile, he's not boasting. He's simply stating fact, the way you might mention that water is wet or stones are hard. But beneath that confidence, particularly in the games, there's fear. The white frost terrifies Eredin in ways nothing else does. He's a warrior who has faced death countless times without flinching. He's a king who rules through strength and wit. But the white frost is beyond his ability to fight. It's not an enemy that can be defeated in battle, not a problem that strategy can solve. It's entropy itself, the end of everything, inevitable and unstoppable. Unless he can get Ciri, unless he can use her elder blood to open the Gate of Worlds properly, to move his entire people to another dimension, to escape the doom that awaits their current home, then he can save the Aen Elle. Then his life's work will mean something. Then he won't have failed. This desperation makes Eredin more dangerous. A confident warrior can be predicted, anticipated, countered. A desperate warrior, especially one as skilled as Eredin, becomes unpredictable. He'll take risks that normally would be beneath him. He'll make deals he'd otherwise refuse. He'll ally with anyone, use any means, cross any line, because the alternative is watching his entire civilization die. In the games, it's revealed that Eredin had a hand in Oberon's death. The old king stood in the way of capturing Ciri, or at least made the process more complicated than necessary. Based on what the games present, Eredin supplied him with an overdose of aphrodisiac or performance enhancer. Knowing Oberon's advanced age, made such drugs potentially fatal. Whether this was calculated murder or simply reckless ambition that went further than intended remains ambiguous. Either way, Oberon died, and Eredin became king in truth as well as name. This act reveals something crucial about Eredin's character. He's willing to remove even his own ruler, even the elf who gave him power and position, if that ruler becomes an obstacle to Aen Elle survival. Loyalty matters to Eredin, but only insofar as it serves the greater good of his people. Personal connections, honor, tradition, all of these are secondary to the existential necessity of ensuring the Aen Elle continue to exist. it also shows his pragmatism. Eredin doesn't kill Oberon in a fit of rage or ambition. He does it quietly, subtly, in a way that might be mistaken for natural causes. He doesn't boast about it or use it to claim power openly. He simply removes an obstacle and moves on. This is how Eredin operates, with calculated efficiency, minimal drama, maximum effectiveness. As king of the Wild Hunt and ruler of the Aen Elle, Eredin commands enormous power. He has the best military in his dimension. He has access to magic and technology beyond what most worlds possess. He has warriors who would follow him into any danger without question. And he has the will to use all of it, to commit any atrocity, to sacrifice anyone necessary if doing so saves his people from the white frost. His generals reflect aspects of his character. Imlerith is pure brutality, a warrior who solves problems through overwhelming force. When subtlety fails, Imlerith succeeds through sheer violent determination. He's the hammer to Eredin's sword. Carantha is magic incarnate, a navigator of incredible power, capable of opening portals across vast distances and through complex dimensional barriers. He represents the Aen Elle's magical superiority, their ability to warp reality itself to their purposes. Gales is the politician, the diplomat, the one who maintains Eredin's authority in Tir Nalia, while Eredin himself hunts Ciri across dimensions. Together with Eredin, these three form the core of Wild Hunt leadership. Each brings unique capabilities. Each is absolutely loyal, at least until they have reason not to be. And each is willing to do whatever the mission requires, regardless of moral considerations. But for all his power, all his skill, all his determination, Eredin makes crucial mistakes. He underestimates Geralt, seeing him as just another human, failing to recognize that a Witcher is something more, something that has survived centuries of training and combat precisely because he's never just another anything. He underestimates Ciri, treating her as a prize to be won rather than a person with her own power and agency. And most fatally, he underestimates the bonds between Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri, the found family that has formed through years of shared struggle and sacrifice. These mistakes will cost him everything. But before we reach that end, before we see the final confrontation between the Wild Hunt and those who would stop them, we need to understand why Ciri matters so much. Why this one girl, this one descendant of an ancient bloodline, has become the focus of Eredin's entire strategy. Why the fate of multiple worlds hinges on a young woman who never asked for any of this power or responsibility. We need to talk about the Elder Blood and the tragic story of Lara Dorren. Chapter 6. The Elder Blood and Lara Dorren. Centuries before Cirilla Fiona Ellen, Rhiannon was born. Before her grandmother Calanthe ruled Sintra. Before her mother Pavetta displayed miraculous powers at a formal banquet, there was another woman whose blood would shape the future of multiple worlds. Her name was Lara Dorren Ib Shiadal, and she was an Aen Elle princess, daughter of King Oberon Muirsetach, and arguably the most important individual in the entire Witcher saga, despite being long dead before the main events begin. Lara was not born through chance or natural selection. She was the product of generations of careful genetic manipulation, a breeding program designed by Aen Elle sages to create something extraordinary. They called it Aen Elle in elder speech, the elder blood, though it's also known simply as the Lara gene after the woman who became its most powerful carrier. The program's purpose was creating an individual capable of opening the Ardgaith, the gate of the worlds, with their own power, without need for complex rituals or dangerous portal magic. The Aen Elle had observed the unicorns, those mysterious beings who could traverse dimensions seemingly at will, and the sages believed that with sufficient genetic refinement, elves could develop similar capabilities. So they bred for it, selected specific bloodlines, arranged marriages based on magical potential rather than personal preference, tracked genetic traits across generations, tested the children born from these unions, documenting their capabilities, determining which lines showed promise and which could be discarded. It was eugenics, clinical and calculated, treating people as breeding stock, reducing individuals to their genetic potential. And it worked. After generations of this program, Lara Dorren was born carrying elder blood so powerful that even the sages who created it were astonished. She could travel between dimensions with ease, a casual act that required tremendous effort from even the strongest mages. She possessed magical abilities that eclipsed those of any other elf her age. She was everything the program had been designed to create, a living key to unlimited dimensional travel, a being who could restore the Gate of Worlds to full function. She was also young, beautiful, lonely, and promised in marriage to Avalark, an Aen Savern sage, who had been carefully selected as the perfect partner for her breeding purposes. Their children would be even more powerful, the sages believed. With two such gifted parents, the next generation of elder blood carriers would be capable of things no one had yet imagined. The Aen Elle's future seemed assured, but Lara possessed something the sages hadn't accounted for in their genetic calculations: free will, and a desire to be seen as more than a prize, a breeding mare, a genetic experiment. She wanted to be a person, not a tool. She wanted love, not strategic pairing. So she did something that changed the course of history across multiple dimensions. She used her power to travel to the world of the Ensee, the continent where her distant cousins lived among humans and dwarves. And there she met Cregennan of Lod, a human mage. They fell in love. Not politically convenient love, not arranged affection, but genuine passion that transcended species and culture and the gulf between their peoples. Cregennan was brilliant, kind, devoted to the ideal of cooperation between humans and elves rather than endless conflict. Lara saw in him something she'd never found among the Aen Elle, someone who valued her for herself, not for her bloodline or breeding potential. Someone who looked at her and saw Lara, not Aen Elle, made flesh. Their relationship was scandal in every possible way. For the Aen Elle, it was betrayal. Lara was meant to marry Avalark, to have children with him, to continue the genetic program. Instead, she'd given herself to a human, polluting the elder blood, throwing away generations of careful work for simple desire. The fury among the sages was absolute. For humans on the continent, particularly those hostile to elves, the relationship was equally offensive. Here was an elven woman, one of the race that had ruled the continent for millennia, taking up with a human, but also representing everything about elven superiority that humans resented. Cregennan was seen as a traitor to his own kind, choosing elven beauty over human solidarity. And for the Aen Elle elves on the continent, it was complicated. Some saw it as romantic, proof that love could bridge the divide between species. Others saw it as yet another sign of their civilization's decline, their inability to maintain the purity that the Aen Elle still possessed. The reaction was mixed, confused, reflecting the general mess of NC human relations during that era. Lara and Cregennan didn't care. They married. They were happy for a time. And Lara became pregnant. When Lara, now not begging for mercy for herself, but for her unborn child, caught hold of the royal carriage, on the order of Queen Sero, a guard struck with a sword and cut off her fingers. And when a severe frost descended in the night, Lara breathed her last on the forested hilltop, giving birth to a tiny daughter she named Rhiannon, whom she protected with the remains of the warmth still flickering in her failing body. And in that moment of desperation and love, something magical happened, whether through the elder blood responding to desperate need or Lara's final surge of power. No one can say for certain. But spring came to that hillside, warming it impossibly, making flowers bloom in the middle of winter. Faenawed, those white flowers that only grow in Dol Blathana and on the spot where Lara died, bloomed in defiance of season and sense. Rhiannon survived. She was found by Queen Sero of Redania. Some historians suggest this was the same queen who had ordered the guards' violence against Lara, acting now perhaps out of guilt or political calculation. Sero adopted the half-elf child, raised her as a princess of a powerful human kingdom. She grew to adulthood, beautiful and gifted, married, had children. The elder blood continued through her, diluted now, mixed with human genetics, but still present, still powerful, waiting. But the genetic program the Aen Elle had so carefully crafted was ruined. The controlled breeding was over. The elder blood was now in human bloodlines, scattered across the continent, mixing with genes the Aen Elle had never intended to be part of the equation. Generations passed, and the sages watched in frustration as their perfect plan fragmented into chaos. Except chaos sometimes creates interesting results. As Rhiannon's descendants spread across the continent, the elder blood genes split into variations. Some carried the active gene, possessing genuine power, but often unable to control it. Others carried latent versions, genetic potential that wouldn't manifest without specific conditions. Still others were activators, carrying the gene, but with no magical power themselves, only the ability to pass it on. These variants mixed and recombined over generations. Incest, accidental or deliberate, occasionally reunited separated branches of the bloodline. Wars displaced populations, causing families to intermingle that otherwise never would have met. The genetic chaos was complete. utterly beyond any sage's ability to predict or control. But the result, generations later, was Pavetta, Princess of Sintra, who carried active elder blood and displayed it spectacularly at her betrothal feast. The power erupted from her in response to emotional stress, nearly killing everyone present, demonstrating that the elder blood, however diluted and scattered, remained extraordinarily powerful. And Pavetta's daughter, Cyrilla, carried that same blood, not diluted further, but concentrated, as if generations of genetic mixing had somehow recombined to create something approaching the original power Lara Dorren possessed. Ciri became the child of elder blood, the last carrier of Lara's gene in its active, powerful form. She could travel between dimensions. She possessed magical power that made most mages look like candle flames compared to a sun. She was everything the Aen Elle had worked for, everything they'd lost when Lara chose love over duty. And they wanted her back, desperately, urgently, with every resource they could bring to bear. Because the elder blood wasn't just about restoring the gate anymore. It was about survival itself. The white frost was coming, and only someone with Ciri's power could open a portal large enough, stable enough, to move the entire Aen Elle population to a new world before their current one froze into lifeless death. Ciri was the key to everything, the answer to problems she didn't create, the solution to threats she didn't understand, the prize in a contest she never agreed to join. Her bloodline made her valuable beyond measure. Her power made her dangerous beyond calculation. And her unwillingness to be used, her determination to choose her own path, made her the most dangerous person in the multiverse to those who needed her to comply. The Wild Hunt would pursue her across worlds and years, through time itself if necessary. They would use any method, any leverage, any tactic to capture her. They would kidnap those she loved, threaten those she cared for, destroy anyone who stood between them and their goal. Because Ciri wasn't just a person to them. She was salvation. She was the future. She was everything. And in their desperation to save their people, they became the very monsters the legends always said they were. Chapter 7. The Hunt for Ciri. The year is 1267 by the continent's reckoning. Cyrilla Fiona. Ellen Rhiannon is 15 years old, orphaned, displaced, hunted by multiple factions who want to use her for their own purposes. She's been trained as a witcher at Kaer Morhen, learned swordplay and alchemy and the basics of monster hunting. She's discovered she possesses magical abilities far beyond anything her trainers expected, and she's about to encounter the Wild Hunt for the first time, though she doesn't yet understand what they are or why they want her. In the novels, the Wild Hunt's pursuit of Ciri is more subtle than direct. They don't charge at her immediately. Instead, they appear in visions, in the spaces between worlds, in moments when Ciri uses her power to jump through dimensions. She sees them in the sky, hears their approach, feels the cold that accompanies their presence. They're hunting her, certainly, but from a distance, tracking her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. Avalach makes contact first, not as an enemy, but as a helper, a guide, someone who claims to want to teach her to control her powers. He's patient, sophisticated, playing the long game as always. He brings Ciri to Tir eventually, to the world of the Aen Elle, not through force, but through manipulation, making her think it's her choice, her decision, her desire to learn from the only people who truly understand the elder blood. Once there, Ciri discovers the truth too late. She's trapped, held by magical barriers Avalach created. The Aen Elle want her to have a child with Oberon, to breed new carriers of the elder blood, to restore what Lara Doran's choices took from them. Oberon is ancient, far too old for such things under normal circumstances, but with magical enhancement, perhaps it's possible. Perhaps Ciri can be forced into this role, this genetic salvation the Aen Elle need so desperately. Eredin is there, of course. He plays a complex role, simultaneously threat and temptation. He flirts with Ciri, knowing she finds him attractive, using that attraction as a tool. He presents himself as different from Avalach and Oberon, younger, more vital, more sympathetic to her situation. It's manipulation, but skilled manipulation, the kind that makes Ciri question whether he might actually be an ally despite all evidence to the contrary. Meanwhile, Ciri explores this alien world, discovering the slavery, the mountains of bones, the casual cruelty with which the Aen Elle treat those they consider inferior. She meets unicorns, those mysterious beings at war with the elves, and learns from them about the Aen Elle's true history, their conquests, their atrocities. The beautiful city becomes a prison, and the elegant elves become her captors. Then Oberon dies. Eredin's machinations, or perhaps just unfortunate accident with the aphrodisiac, but the old king dies before achieving the Aen Elle's goal. And in the chaos that follows, Ciri escapes. She uses her power to jump through dimensions, fleeing randomly, desperately, not caring where she goes as long as it's away from Tir And the wild hunt follows. No longer patient, no longer subtle. Now they hunt her actively, aggressively, crossing dimensions in pursuit. Eredin leads them personally, commanding his Red Riders to find her, capture her, bring her back regardless of cost or consequence. She's too valuable to let escape, too important to their survival to let slip away. But Ciri is clever and desperate, and more powerful than even she fully understands. She jumps through worlds, sometimes intentionally, often randomly, staying ahead of the hunt through combination of skill and luck. She visits countless dimensions, sees things no one from the continent has ever witnessed, experiences wonders and horrors that would break most people. The hunt appears in her nightmares, even when they're not physically chasing her. The sound of their approach, the baying of hounds that aren't quite hounds, the sense of cold and death and inevitable pursuit. They're always behind her, always hunting, and she knows that eventually they'll catch up. In the games, particularly The Witcher 3, the hunt's pursuit becomes more immediate and visceral. They're not just following Ciri through dimensions, they're actively invading the continent, bringing their forces to bear, attacking anyone they think might know her location. Villages are destroyed, innocent people are killed or taken. The wild hunt stops being a distant threat and becomes an immediate catastrophe. They learn about Geralt and Yennefer, understand that Ciri loves these two as parents despite no blood relation. And Eredin, pragmatic as always, decides to use that love as a weapon. If Ciri won't come to them willingly, perhaps she'll come to save those she cares about. So the Wild Hunt attacks the Isle of Mists, a remote location where Geralt and Yennefer have retired, trying to live peaceful lives away from politics and monsters and destiny. Eredin knows Geralt is dangerous, a witcher of legendary skill. But Eredin has an entire cavalry of elite warriors. Numbers and power should be sufficient. The battle is brutal. Geralt fights like a demon, killing Red Riders with ruthless efficiency, demonstrating why witchers are feared even by beings far more powerful. But there are too many of them. Even Geralt can't overcome those odds. The Wild Hunt takes Yennefer, capturing her, planning to use her as bait, and Geralt pursues. Of course he does. Yennefer is his destiny, his partner, possibly the only person he loves as much as Ciri. He can't abandon her to the Wild Hunt's mercy, assuming they have any mercy at all. But one witcher against an entire dimension of hostile elves is suicide. He needs help. He finds it in unexpected places. Letho of Gulet, a fellow witcher from the School of the Viper, joins him along with two others, Serid and Orcs. The Vipers know about the Wild Hunt, have studied them, dedicated their school to understanding and fighting these interdimensional raiders. They have information, strategies, weapons specifically designed for combat against Aen Elle magic and armor. Together, they pursue the Wild Hunt across the continent, finally catching up to them at a location called the Hanged Man's Tree in Nilfgaard. The confrontation is everything you'd expect. Witchers fighting spectral riders, steel clashing against bones, magic exploding across the battlefield. But for all their skill, the witchers are still outnumbered. The battle reaches a stalemate, neither side able to destroy the other, and Eredin makes an offer, a trade. Geralt for Yennefer. 1 for 1, a simple exchange. Geralt accepts immediately. He knows it's a trap, understands that Eredin wants him as bait for Ciri just as much as Yennefer. But he doesn't care. Saving Yennefer matters more than his own safety or freedom. So he gives himself to the Wild Hunt. For months, Geralt rides with them. A witcher among spectral riders, a human among elves, a prisoner who is also a warrior. The details of this time remain murky, fragments recovered later through flashbacks and recovered memories. But we know some things. We know Eredin treats him with a kind of professional respect. One fighter acknowledging another's skill even as circumstances make them enemies. We know Geralt learns about the Aen Elle, about their world, about their desperation and the white frost that drives their actions. And we know that eventually, Ciri discovers what happened and comes to save him. Because of course she does. Geralt saved her repeatedly, protected her, trained her, loved her as a daughter. She can't abandon him any more than he could abandon Yennefer. So she confronts the Wild Hunt, uses her power to free Geralt, fights her way through Red Riders to reach him. The rescue works mostly. She gets Geralt away from the hunt, uses her dimension-jumping abilities to put him someplace safe. Specifically, she places him near the ruins of Kaer Morhen, where fellow witchers will find him. But something goes wrong in the process. Geralt survives, but he emerges with amnesia, no memory of who he is or what happened to him. Ciri disappears again, fleeing the hunt, leaving Geralt to be discovered and cared for by his brothers from the Wolf School. This begins the events of the first Witcher game, where Geralt struggles to piece together his past while mysterious forces hunt him for reasons he can't remember. But that's a story for another time. What matters for our purposes is that Eredin's gambit failed. He had Geralt, had the perfect bait, but Ciri rescued him before the trap could fully close. The hunt is back to direct pursuit, following Ciri's trail across dimensions, hunting her actively and with growing desperation. Because time is running out. The white frost is spreading through their world, consuming it, transforming it from a paradise into a frozen wasteland. The Aen Elle needs Ciri now, not eventually. They need her to open a portal large enough to evacuate their entire civilization. They need her elder blood to save them from apocalypse. And Ciri, caught between multiple threats, multiple factions wanting to use her for their own purposes, is running out of places to hide. The Wild Hunt will find her eventually. They're patient, relentless, and possess resources she can't match indefinitely. The question is not whether they'll catch her, but when, and what will happen when the final confrontation comes. Chapter 8. The White Frost. Imagine cold. Not the cold of a harsh winter that eventually ends. Not the cold of mountain peaks you can descend from. Not the cold of northern climates where life adapts and continues. Imagine cold as absolute absence of warmth, cold as the death of heat itself, cold that spreads inexorably across entire worlds, transforming vibrant planets into lifeless balls of ice. Imagine cold that nothing can stop, that no magic can halt, that no technology can defeat. Imagine the end of everything, arriving slowly but unstoppably, visible for years before it kills you, but inevitable nonetheless. This is the White Frost, and it's coming for the Aen Elle world. In Sapkowski's novels, the White Frost is treated as a natural phenomenon occurring on geological timescales. According to the sorceress Nimue and the sage Avallac'h, the White Frost will eventually consume the northern hemisphere of the continent, causing an ice age that makes the land uninhabitable. Critically, this won't happen for thousands of years. Avallac'h estimates around 3,000 years after the events of the main saga. The inevitability is what matters in the books. The White Frost cannot be prevented. No amount of magic, no application of technology, no desperate prayer to gods or powers will stop it. The orbit of the planet will shift, the axis will change, the ice will come, and everything in its path will die. The only salvation is leaving, moving to another world through the portals that elder blood can open, evacuating before the freeze makes survival impossible. This is why Ithlinne's prophecy matters so much. That ancient elven diviner foresaw the coming of the White Frost, the death of the world, and the salvation offered by the child of elder blood. The prophecy isn't detailed, written in the cryptic language that all prophecies seem to use, but its core message is clear. The person with elder blood will be crucial to survival when the end comes. The games, particularly The Witcher 3, take a more immediate and dramatic approach. Here, the white frost isn't a distant threat millennia away. It's happening now, actively consuming the Aen Elle world, turning Tir na Lia from paradise into frozen hell. Eredin's desperation stems from watching his civilization die in real time, seeing the elegant buildings covered in ice, watching the city empty as people flee to warmer regions that themselves will freeze soon enough. CD Projekt Red's interpretation presents the white frost as something almost alive, an entity with purpose rather than just natural process. It's described as consuming worlds, moving from dimension to dimension, leaving death in its wake. The frozen world of Ted Dirad that players briefly visit during the quest. Through time and space, shows what the white frost does. Complete glaciation, all life extinguished, civilization buried under kilometers of ice. Documents found there speak of the frost arriving slowly, as unending snowfall that never stops, that gradually buries everything, that exhausts supplies and kills through cold and starvation and the slow grinding down of hope. The game's interpretation makes the white frost more threatening, more immediate, but also arguably less grounded in the pseudo-medieval reality Sapkowski created. If it's jumping between dimensions, consuming entire worlds one after another, what drives it? What purpose does it serve? Is it truly alive? Or is it just catastrophic natural force misunderstood by those experiencing it? The game never fully explains, leaving the white frost as mysterious as it is deadly. What both versions agree on is the Aen Elle's response. They cannot stop the frost, they can only flee from it. And fleeing requires opening the gate of the worlds properly, creating portals stable enough and large enough to move an entire civilization, maintaining them long enough for everyone to pass through to a new world. This requires elder blood power on a scale that, according to their calculations, only Ciri possesses. The target for their evacuation is obvious: the continent, the world where the NC live, where humans have become dominant, where resources are plentiful and the climate is relatively stable. The Aen Elle would arrive as conquerors, using their superior military and magic to subjugate the existing populations, establishing a new Tir na Lia on the ruins of human and dwarven civilizations. It would be catastrophic for the continent. The Aen Elle are vastly more powerful than any force the kingdoms could muster. Their magic alone would devastate armies. Their red riders could sweep through the north, taking cities, destroying resistance, establishing dominance with terrifying efficiency. The human era would end, replaced by renewed elven supremacy, this time backed by the full might of the Aen Elle, rather than the dwindling numbers of the NC. And the Aen Elle see nothing wrong with this plan. To them, it's survival. They're not invading out of malice or greed. They're fleeing death. If other people already live in their target refuge, that's unfortunate, but irrelevant. Superior beings have the right to take what they need from inferior ones. The continent's current inhabitants can serve as slaves, just as humans from other worlds have always served the Aen Elle. It's simply continuing their established way of life in a new location. This makes the White Frost crucial to understanding the Wild Hunt's motivations. Eredin isn't pursuing Ciri because he's evil or power-hungry. He's pursuing her because she's literally his people's only hope for survival. Without her, the Aen Elle will die. Every single one of them will freeze when the White Frost completes its consumption of their world. Extinction, total and absolute, is the alternative to success. Does this justify their methods? The slavery, the kidnapping, the terror they spread, the people they've killed and tortured in their quest to capture one girl? Morally, obviously not. The threat of extinction doesn't give you the right to commit atrocities, to treat other sentient beings as tools or obstacles, to inflict suffering on innocents who have nothing to do with your problems. But pragmatically, from the Aen Elle perspective, it's simple mathematics. Their entire civilization versus one girl who possesses power she didn't ask for and isn't using. Thousands or millions of Aen Elle lives versus Ciri's freedom. The needs of the many versus the rights of one. When framed that way, the choice seems obvious. Except it's not that simple. Ciri is a person, not a tool. She has rights, agency, autonomy. Her power doesn't obligate her to save the Aen Elle, especially not when their version of salvation requires enslaving or destroying everyone else on the continent. And the Aen Elle's situation, while dire, is partially self-inflicted. They've structured their entire society around exploitation and conquest. They've made enemies of everyone they've encountered, including the unicorns who might otherwise have helped them. They've chosen cruelty and supremacy over cooperation and adaptation. The White Frost is coming, yes, but the Aen Elle's inability to survive it reflects choices they made long before the Frost became a threat. They could have developed peaceful relations with other worlds, established trade rather than slavery, created alliances instead of enmity. They could have worked with the unicorns, learned dimensional travel through cooperation rather than trying to steal it. They could have, centuries ago, begun adapting their society to function without slaves, developing sustainable systems that didn't require constant exploitation of other races. They didn't. And now, facing extinction, they're demanding that others pay the price for their failures. They're insisting that Ciri sacrifice herself, her freedom, her future, to save a civilization built on cruelty, maintained through oppression, facing consequences that are arguably deserved. This moral complexity is what makes the White Frost and the Aen Elle situation compelling. They're not wrong that extinction is terrible. They're not wrong that they need to escape the Frost. They're not wrong that Ciri has the power to save them. But they're absolutely wrong in how they're going about it, in their refusal to consider any approach other than force and compulsion, in their assumption that their survival justifies any action. The White Frost is tragic because it's indiscriminate. It doesn't care about Aen Elle's crimes or virtues. It simply consumes, kills, ends. Innocent Aen Elle, children who never participated in slavery or conquest, will die alongside those who made the choices that created this situation. That's terrible. That's genuinely tragic. But their tragedy doesn't obligate Ciri to become their savior, and their desperation doesn't give them the right to hurt everyone else in their desperate scramble to survive. The white frost is coming, and the final confrontation between those who would use it as justification for atrocity and those who would stop them at any cost is inevitable. Chapter 9. Geralt's Entanglement. For most of his life, Geralt of Rivia existed on the margins of great events. He was a witcher, a monster hunter, someone who killed drowners and griffins for coin. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, didn't involve himself in politics, didn't concern himself with the fate of kingdoms or the destiny of worlds. He did his job, tried to maintain neutrality, and hoped to survive long enough to retire somewhere quiet. Then he bound himself to Ciri through the law of surprise, that ancient custom where saving someone's life entitled you to an unexpected reward. He claimed Ciri before she was even born, making her his through bonds stronger than blood. And in doing so, he inadvertently threw himself into the path of forces that would reshape the multiverse. After the chaos in Rivia, where both Geralt and Yennefer died, Ciri used her powers to resurrect them and transport them to Malice Island, sometimes called the Isle of Avalach or Avalon. This was supposed to be their refuge, their chance at peace. They'd earned it. They'd fought enough battles, survived enough dangers, sacrificed enough for destiny and prophecy and the greater good. Time to rest. Time to simply exist without constant threat or struggle. The wild hunt shattered that peace. Eredin, tracking Ciri's use of power, discovered where she had taken Geralt and Yennefer. He needed leverage over Ciri, and the two people she loved most provided perfect targets. They were isolated on a remote island, far from any military support. They were known to care for Ciri as their own daughter. And while formidable fighters, they were still just two people, however skilled and powerful. The Red Riders could overwhelm them through numbers alone. The attack came without warning, portals opening above the island, Red Riders pouring through, skeletal horses and bone armor and weapons glowing with eldritch power. Geralt met them with steel and silver, fighting with the desperate ferocity of someone protecting the woman he loves. He killed Red Riders, many of them, demonstrating why witches are feared even by beings far more powerful than normal humans. Yennefer fought too, unleashing magic that turned the battlefield into apocalyptic chaos. Fire and ice, lightning and force, spells that ripped Red Riders from their mounts and shattered their armor. She was one of the most powerful sorceresses on the continent, and she demonstrated every bit of that power in those desperate moments. But there were too many. The Wild Hunt's numbers were overwhelming. For every rider killed, two more appeared through the portals. Eventually, through combination of exhaustion and tactical maneuvering, the hunt subdued Yennefer. They bound her with magical restraints that nullified her power and retreated through their portals before Geralt could stop them. Geralt was left standing among the corpses of Red Riders, wounded, furious, and completely alone. Yennefer was gone, taken by the hunt, and he understood exactly why. They wanted to use her as bait, to draw Ciri out of hiding. And it might work, because Ciri loved Yennefer too, would risk everything to save her. But before Ciri even knew what had happened, Geralt was already in pursuit. He wouldn't wait for Ciri to sacrifice herself. He wouldn't use her as a weapon against the hunt. He would handle this himself somehow, even if it killed him. Finding help proved unexpectedly fortunate. Letho of Gulid, a witcher from the School of the Viper, had been tracking the wild hunt for years. His school had been founded specifically to study and combat these interdimensional raiders, to understand their methods and weaknesses, to develop strategies for fighting them. When Letho crossed paths with Geralt, learning that Geralt was planning to confront the hunt, he offered assistance along with two fellow Vipers, Serid and Orcus. The Vipers brought knowledge that Geralt lacked. They understood how the hunt's armor worked, what weaknesses it possessed, what spells could penetrate their magical defenses. They had oils and potions specifically formulated for combat against Aen Elle warriors. They had tactics developed over generations of study, strategies that might give 4 witches a chance against an entire cavalry of elite soldiers. Tracking the hunt wasn't difficult. They left trails across dimensions, distortions in reality that someone with sufficient skill could follow. The witches pursued, moving across the continent, following signs and rumors and the occasional witness report of skeletal riders in the sky. The chase took months, long enough for Geralt to fear what might be happening to Yennefer in captivity, what torments the Aen Elle might inflict to break her will or simply to pass the time. The confrontation at the Hanged Man's Tree in Nilfgaard was everything the legends promised and nothing the witches hoped for. The wild hunt appeared in full force, dozens of Red Riders with Eredin himself at their head. The battle was spectacular and terrible, witches fighting with desperate skill against overwhelming opposition. They killed many Red Riders, far more than should have been possible, demonstrating why witches are specifically designed to fight monsters. Because the Wild Hunt, for all their power and sophistication, were monsters in the ways that mattered. But skill and desperation could only go so far. The witches couldn't win through force. They could barely achieve a stalemate, neither side able to destroy the other, but the witches unable to rescue Yennefer. It was Eredin who broke the deadlock, making his offer. Geralt for Yennefer, 1 for 1, a simple exchange. Letho argued against it. It was obviously a trap, obviously meant to use Geralt as the bait they'd planned to use Yennefer for. Accepting meant giving the hunt exactly what they wanted. But Geralt didn't care. Yennefer was suffering because of her connection to him, to Ciri, to a destiny she'd never asked for. He couldn't leave her in the hunt's hands, not when he could trade himself for her freedom. So he accepted, rode forward to where Eredin waited, made the exchange, watched as Yennefer was released to Letho's custody, watched as she was carried away to safety, and then submitted to the hunt's custody, allowing them to take him, bind him, carry him away to become their prisoner and bait. The months Geralt spent riding with the Wild Hunt were strange beyond description. He was a captive, yes, but also treated with a kind of professional courtesy. Eredin respected skilled warriors, even enemy warriors, and Geralt had proven his capabilities repeatedly. So rather than simple imprisonment or torture, Geralt experienced something more complex. He rode with the Red Riders, witnessing their raids on other worlds, seeing firsthand the terror they spread and the slavery they enforced. He saw the Aen Elle world, Tir na Lia in all its crystalline beauty and casual cruelty. He learned about the white frost, understood the desperation driving Eredin's actions even as he condemned the methods. He met Avalach, conversed with that ancient sage about elder blood and prophecy and the weight of choosing who lives and who dies. And through it all, he was bait. Eredin made no secret of it. Geralt was here to draw Ciri out of hiding, to make her come to him, to finally give the Aen Elle the leverage they needed. It was pragmatic, straightforward, exactly what everyone involved knew would happen. The only question was whether Ciri would fall for such an obvious trap. She did. Of course she did. Because Ciri loved Geralt, viewed him as her father in all the ways that mattered, couldn't abandon him any more than he could abandon Yennefer. Love is predictable in ways that make it exploitable, and Eredin understood that perfectly. When Ciri came for Geralt, the hunt was ready. They'd prepared ambushes, established defenses, positioned their best warriors to capture her the moment she appeared. Eredin himself was there, commanding the operation, determined that this time she wouldn't escape. But Ciri was also prepared, in her own way. She'd grown stronger, learned to control her powers better, understood dimensional travel in ways she hadn't before, and she was desperate, willing to take risks that would have terrified her earlier, willing to push her abilities to their absolute limits. The battle was chaos incarnate. Ciri appearing, Red Riders converging, magic and steel clashing, dimensional rifts opening and closing as Ciri used her power defensively and offensively. She fought her way through the Hunt's forces with combination of swordplay learned from Geralt and raw magical power that made even Aen Elle mages look inadequate. She reached Geralt, broke his restraints, grabbed him, and jumped. Through dimensions, across realities, fleeing the Hunt's pursuit through sheer velocity and unpredictability. She couldn't maintain the jumping indefinitely, couldn't keep them both safe while also fighting off pursuing Red Riders. So she made a desperate decision. She brought Geralt to the continent, specifically to the area around Kaer Morhen, where other witches would find him. And then she left him there and fled alone, drawing the Hunt away from Geralt, leading them on another chase across worlds. But something went wrong. Whether it was the strain of the prolonged dimensional jumping, or something the Hunt did during the rescue, or simply bad luck, Geralt emerged from the final jump with amnesia, complete, total memory loss. He didn't know who he was, where he was from, what had happened to him. He was found by witches from the Wolf School, brought to Kaer Morhen, nursed back to physical health, but his memories remained gone. This amnesia would drive the events of the first Witcher game, where Geralt struggled to reconstruct his identity while being hunted by forces connected to the Wild Hunt. The Spectral King appeared to him repeatedly, haunting his dreams, taunting him with fragments of truth mixed with lies, trying to break his spirit or drive him mad. Even with Geralt no longer in their custody, the Hunt continued to pursue him, to use him as bait, to hope that eventually Ciri would return to save him again, and this time they'd be ready. The Hunt's obsession with Geralt revealed something important about their strategy. They weren't just hunting Ciri through dimensional tracking and magical detection. They were hunting her emotionally, attacking her through the people she loved, using her own compassion as a weapon against her. It was ruthless, effective, and deeply personal in ways that transcended simple military tactics. Eredin understood that Ciri's power made direct confrontation difficult. She could escape almost any trap, could jump through dimensions faster than the hunt could follow. But she wouldn't abandon those she loved. Her humanity, her refusal to sacrifice others for her own safety, that was her weakness. And Eredin exploited it with clinical precision. This entire episode, from Yennefer's capture through Geralt's rescue to his amnesia, demonstrated the hunt's methodology. They weren't just raiders or slavers. They were psychological warfare experts, beings who understood that the most effective weapons aren't physical, but emotional. Break your enemy's spirit, make them choose between impossible options, and victory becomes inevitable. But they underestimated something crucial. They underestimated the strength of the bonds between Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri. They assumed that love could be weaponized, that emotional connection was vulnerability. And it was vulnerable, certainly, but it was also strength. It motivated sacrifices that rational self-interest would never allow. It created determination that fear couldn't break. It made three people into something greater than the sum of their individual capabilities. The hunt would learn this lesson the hard way. When the final confrontation came, when Eredin made his last desperate attempt to capture Ciri, he would face not just a girl with extraordinary power, but a family that would fight to the death to protect each other. And that family, forged through choice rather than blood, through shared struggle rather than genetic inheritance, would prove stronger than anything the King of the Wild Hunt could bring to bear. Chapter 10. The Final Confrontation. The year is 1275. 8 years after Geralt was found near Kaer Morhen with no memory of who he was. 5 years after he defeated the Salamandra organization and slowly began recovering fragments of his past. 3 years after he stopped the conspiracies surrounding the Witcher assassinations and remembered more of his relationship with Ciri. The Wild Hunt has never stopped pursuing him, never stopped appearing in his nightmares, never stopped hunting Ciri through whatever means they can. And now, finally, the hunt is making their final move. The white frost has nearly consumed the Aen Elle world. Tir Nalia is freezing, its elegant buildings coated in ice, its gardens dying, its population desperate. They have one chance left, one last opportunity to capture Ciri, force her to open a portal large enough to evacuate their entire civilization. After this, there will be no tomorrow. Either they escape or they die. Eredin knows where Ciri is. The hunt has been tracking her, and finally, they've cornered her at Kaer Morhen, the ruined Witcher fortress where Geralt and Ciri first bonded, where she learned to fight, where she became something more than just a princess fleeing danger. It's fitting that the final confrontation would happen there, at the place that represents Ciri's chosen family and her transformation into a warrior. The Wild Hunt attacks in overwhelming force. This isn't a raid or a skirmish. This is a full military assault. Everything Eredin can bring to bear. Dozens of Red Riders, his best generals, magical support that tears reality itself, and Eredin himself leading from the front. They pour through portals, descending on Kaer Morhen like the apocalypse made manifest. The defenders are ready. Geralt, having finally remembered everything, has prepared for this moment. He's called in allies, favors owed, debts to be collected. Yennefer is there, of course, along with other sorceresses who've agreed to help despite their own political complications. Witches from various schools have gathered, warriors who normally work alone, but recognize that this threat requires cooperation. Even Triss Merigold, despite complicated history with Geralt and Yennefer, stands with them. The Battle of Kaer Morhen is legendary. One of those conflicts that people will talk about for generations. Witches fighting Red Riders in close combat, silver swords clashing against elven steel, sorceresses dueling Aen Elle mages, spells colliding with enough force to crack the fortress's ancient walls, Eredin himself engaging multiple opponents simultaneously, demonstrating why he's commanded the hunt for so long. Ciri fights too, of course. She's the target, the prize everyone is dying to capture or protect. And she's magnificent, combining her Witcher training with her dimensional powers, teleporting short distances to avoid attacks, striking from unexpected angles, using her Elder Blood abilities in ways even she didn't know were possible. She's no longer the girl fleeing the hunt in terror. She's a warrior, capable of standing against the king of the Wild Hunt himself. But the hunt is overwhelming. Despite all the defenders' skill, despite magical support and tactical advantage of fighting from fortified positions, they're losing. Too many Red Riders, too much power. Caranthias, portals, keep bringing in fresh forces, while the defenders exhaust themselves. Imlerith is cutting through witches who have hunted monsters for decades. The battle is turning against them. Vesemir dies. The eldest witcher, Geralt's mentor, Ciri's teacher, dies protecting her from the hunt. He sacrifices himself so she can escape, taking wounds meant for her, fighting beyond what his aging body can endure. His death breaks something in Ciri, unleashes power she didn't know she possessed. Raw Elder Blood magic that explodes across the battlefield, killing Red Riders, forcing even Eredin to retreat. The hunt pulls back, withdraws, having failed to capture Ciri, but having dealt a devastating blow to her psychologically. The hunt is still out there, still pursuing, but now with increased desperation. Eredin knows that was his best chance, that attacking Kaer Morhen with everything he had and still failing means his options are dwindling. The white frost continues consuming his world. Time is running out. He needs to take risks, make moves that might destroy everything, but are the only remaining possibilities. Geralt pursues them. This isn't about defense anymore. This is about finishing it, about destroying the Wild Hunt before they can recover and try again. He tracks them across the continent, investigating their recent raids, interrogating survivors, following the trail of frozen devastation they leave behind. Every village the hunt touches is marked by unnatural cold, by people vanished, by the sense that something fundamentally wrong has passed through. The investigation reveals the extent of the hunt's knowledge about Ciri. They've interrogated people, tortured informants, destroyed anyone who might have information about her location. They're utterly ruthless, no longer pretending at any kind of morality or restraint. This is their last chance at survival, and they'll murder anyone, destroy anything, commit any atrocity if it brings them closer to capturing Ciri. Geralt confronts Imlerith first, the brutal warrior who has killed countless people in the Hunt's service. The battle is savage, two masters of violence testing each other to destruction. Imlerith is stronger, faster than any normal human, enhanced by Aen Elle magic and centuries of combat experience. But Geralt is a witcher, specifically designed to kill things stronger than himself, trained in techniques that turn advantages into vulnerabilities. The fight is close, desperate, but Geralt prevails, killing Imlerith and claiming his head as proof that the Hunt is not invincible. Then Caranthir, the navigator mage, whose portals have enabled the Hunt's raids for years. This battle is more magical, more about countering spells and disrupting magical constructs than simple physical combat. Yennefer helps here, providing the magical expertise Geralt lacks, helping him survive Caranthir's devastating spells long enough to close the distance. When Geralt finally reaches Caranthir, when silver sword meets elven flesh, the mage dies in disbelief that a mere human could defeat him. With his generals dead, his forces depleted, his world dying, Eredin makes his final stand on the Naglfar, the ship named after the mythical vessel that would carry the forces of chaos during Ragnarok. Its fitting symbolism. Eredin sees himself as the destroyer of worlds, the force that will tear down one civilization to build another, the necessary evil that ensures his people's survival. The battle between Geralt and Eredin is personal in ways their previous encounters weren't. This isn't king versus subject or hunter versus prey. This is two warriors who have spent years in conflict, who understand each other perhaps better than they'd like to admit, who recognize in each other a willingness to do anything for those they protect. They're mirrors, reflections of what absolute dedication looks like when applied to incompatible goals. They fight across the Naglfar's deck, through portals to other dimensions, across realities that exist only briefly before collapsing. Eredin opens rifts to distract Geralt, pulls him through nightmarish landscapes, uses every advantage his dimensional abilities provide. But Geralt is relentless, pursuing through every portal, adapting to every environment, refusing to let Eredin escape or gain lasting advantage. The fight is long, exhausting, the kind of combat that leaves both participants barely able to stand by the end. But Geralt's Witcher endurance, his ability to survive injuries that would kill normal men, gives him just enough edge. His blade finds openings in Eredin's defense, exploits weaknesses the King of the Wild Hunt didn't know he had. Eredin falls, the Sparrow Hawk, commander of the Red Riders, King of the Wild Hunt, dies on the deck of his flagship, killed by a Witcher from the continent he'd planned to conquer. And in dying, he reveals one final piece of treachery. Avalach has been manipulating both sides, using Eredin's desperation and Geralt's determination to serve his own mysterious purposes. Everything, from beginning to end, has been the sage's plan, and neither Eredin nor Geralt are truly the ones in control. But that revelation comes too late for Eredin. He dies, the Wild Hunt effectively ends with him, and Geralt is left standing among the wreckage of elven ambition, wondering what comes next. What comes next is Ciri's choice. The white frost is not stopped by Eredin's death. It continues spreading, and now a new conjunction of the spheres is beginning. Portals opening randomly across the continent, monsters flooding through. The multiverse is destabilizing, and at the center of it is the white frost, that apocalyptic cold that threatens not just the Aen Elle world, but potentially every dimension. Ciri has the power to stop it. Her elder blood, that genetic gift she never asked for, can be used to enter the heart of the white frost, to somehow halt or slow or redirect this catastrophic force. But doing so might kill her. Probably will kill her. It's a sacrifice, possibly the ultimate sacrifice, using her life to save countless worlds from freezing death. Whether Ciri survives depends on choices Geralt made throughout their relationship, on whether he showed her that he believed in her, trusted her judgment, treated her as capable rather than something fragile to be protected. If Geralt empowered Ciri, if he gave her confidence and autonomy, she survives the confrontation with the white frost and emerges triumphant. If he coddled her, overprotected her, failed to let her be herself, she succumbs to the frost's power and is lost forever. It's a fitting conclusion to a saga about choice and consequence, about found family and the bonds we choose, rather than those we inherit. Ciri's fate hinges not on prophecy or destiny or genetic potential, but on whether the man who became her father treated her as a person rather than a burden to be protected. And regardless of outcome, the Wild Hunt's threat ends. Their civilization is scattered, leaderless, depleted by years of desperate warfare. Some might survive, might find refuge in other dimensions, might eventually rebuild. But the nightmare that rode across winter skies, that haunted the dreams of generations, that made entire worlds tremble at its approach, that threat is finished. Conclusion. Legacy of the Hunt. The Wild Hunt is gone. Eredin Break. Glass is dead. The Red Riders are scattered. The Aen Elle civilization, if it survives at all, will never again possess the power and certainty it once wielded. The centuries-long reign of terror, the raids across dimensions, the slavery and suffering, all of it ends in the frozen wreckage of a dying world and on the deck of a ship named for apocalypse. But their legacy remains, woven into the folklore and nightmares of countless cultures across multiple dimensions. The peasants of Skellige still fear the wraiths of Morhog, even if the original riders will never come again. Children across the continent are still threatened with tales of spectral horsemen who steal bad children in the night. The legend of the Wild Hunt has become divorced from its reality, transformed into pure mythology, and mythology is harder to kill than any physical enemy. What do we learn from the Wild Hunt? What does their story teach us beyond the surface narrative of heroes defeating villains, witches vanquishing otherworldly threats? First, we learn that evil doesn't require ugliness or obvious monstrosity. The Aen Elle were sophisticated, cultured, appreciative of beauty and art. Tyr na Lia was genuinely magnificent, and yet they built their civilization on slavery and genocide, justified atrocities through appeals to superiority, chose conquest over cooperation at every turn. The hunt shows us that monsters can appreciate beauty, that terrible things can be done by people who create wonders, that elegance and cruelty are not incompatible. Second, we learn that desperation makes everything worse. Eredin's final actions, the hunt's increasing ruthlessness, stemmed from the White Frost threat. They were desperate, watching their world die, and desperation led them to commit horrors they might have hesitated at otherwise. But desperation doesn't excuse evil. It explains it, provides context, but doesn't make it acceptable. The Aen Elle's crisis was real, but their response was still monstrous. Third, we see that the sins of past generations echo through time in ways those committing them never anticipate. The Aen Elle's genetic program created Lara Doran, whose choice to love a human rather than serve their purposes scattered the elder blood across centuries and bloodlines. That scattering eventually produced Ciri, who became the key to either salvation or destruction, depending on who controlled her. The Hunt spent generations pursuing the consequences of their own ancestors' actions, trying to fix a problem their civilization had created. Fourth, we understand that found families, chosen bonds, can be stronger than blood or prophecy. Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri weren't related except through the law of surprise and mutual affection. They chose each other, and that choice, renewed repeatedly through crisis and conflict, created loyalty that defeated an empire. The Hunt's pragmatic exploitation of emotional bonds proved less effective than the genuine love that created those bonds in the first place. The Wild Hunt story is ultimately tragic on multiple levels. Tragic for their victims, obviously. All those people taken, enslaved, killed across centuries of raids. Tragic for the Aen Elle citizens who weren't warriors or decision-makers, who just lived in Tir Nalir and accepted what their leaders told them, who died when the White Frost came because their civilization's choices made survival impossible. Tragic even for Eredin, a warrior who genuinely tried to save his people and failed because the methods he chose made success impossible. Sapkowski's genius was taking folklore that exists across Northern European cultures, treating it seriously, asking, what if these legends were based on something real, and building a science fiction explanation that somehow makes the fantasy elements more rather than less meaningful. The Wild Hunt remains terrifying, even when you understand they're interdimensional elves rather than actual spirits. Perhaps more terrifying, because beings with technology and motivation are more dangerous than random supernatural forces. CD Projekt Red expanded this foundation, giving the Hunt more screen time, more personality, more presence as the primary antagonists of their trilogy's conclusion. Their interpretation emphasized the desperation, the dying world, the urgency that drove Eredin's increasingly reckless decisions. They made the Hunt comprehensible enemies rather than mysterious forces, and in doing so, made them more frightening because their motivation was recognizable, human in its way, something players could almost understand even while opposing. The Wild Hunt represents something essential to the Witcher universe's themes. the ambiguity of evil, the complexity of moral choices when survival is at stake, the ways that desperation and fear drive people to commit atrocities they'd otherwise recognize as monstrous, the idea that sometimes there are no good options, only terrible choices, and the necessity of choosing despite knowing the cost. And they represent the power of stories themselves. The Wild Hunt in Witcher lore is built on real-world mythology, folklore that has existed for centuries, that shaped European culture, that explained fears and warnings across generations. By incorporating that mythology directly into his universe, Sapkowski connected his fantasy world to our real history, made his story resonate with echoes of beliefs our ancestors held. The hunt feels more real, because versions of them are embedded in our cultural memory. So when the tale ends, when Eredin falls and Ciri faces the white frost and the hunt's terror finally concludes, we're left with questions rather than simple satisfaction. Were the Aen Elle's actions justified by their circumstances? Could they have chosen differently? If your civilization faces extinction, what would you do? What lines would you cross? What atrocities would you commit to save your people? And if you were Ciri, would you sacrifice yourself to save a civilization built on evil but containing innocent people who don't deserve death? These questions don't have comfortable answers. The Wild Hunt story refuses to provide them. And that refusal, that willingness to present moral complexity rather than simple good versus evil, is what makes the hunt one of the most compelling antagonist forces in fantasy, literature, and gaming. The Wild Hunt is gone, but the lessons they taught, the questions they raised, the impact they had on everyone who survived their raids, those things remain. Folklore becomes history, becomes legend, becomes truth. And in that transformation, the hunt achieves a kind of immortality, more enduring than physical existence. The spectral riders no longer gallop across winter skies, but people still look up at dark clouds and remember what once rode there. They still tell stories to their children about the dangers of winter nights. They still carve protective symbols and say prayers against things that hunt in darkness. Because the Wild Hunt was never just an army or an organization or even a civilization's desperate gambit for survival. It was an idea, the embodiment of winter's threat, of the dangers that lurk beyond firelight, of the price civilizations pay when they choose conquest over cooperation. And ideas, once released into the world, cannot be destroyed by any blade, cannot be defeated by any magic. They endure, they transform, they become part of the stories we tell ourselves about danger and survival and the terrible choices people make when facing the abyss. The Wild Hunt endures not in Tirnalia or on the battlefield, but in the collective memory of those who witnessed their passage and survived to tell the tale. And that, perhaps, is the most fitting legacy for a force that began as folklore, became terrible reality, and will end as legend. The Wild Hunt rides forever in our nightmares and stories, a reminder that some threats never truly die. They simply change form, waiting for the next winter, the next dark night, the next moment when survival requires sacrifices we hope we'll never have to make. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the dark history of the Wild Hunt, from ancient folklore to Andrzej Sapkowski's brilliant reinvention to CD Projekt Red's spectacular visualization. If you enjoyed this exploration of one of gaming and literature's most compelling antagonist forces, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the Witcher universe and other fantasy worlds. There are countless more stories to tell, more lore to uncover, more darkness to explore. Until next time, watch the skies during winter storms. And if you see riders where no riders should be, if you hear hoofbeats that sound like thunder and screams, if you feel cold that has nothing to do with weather, remember what we've learned. The Wild Hunt may be gone, but legends never truly die. And some nights, when the wind howls just right, you might wonder if they're truly gone at all, or if they're simply waiting somewhere between dimensions for the stars to align and the worlds to weaken, for their chance to ride once more across the troubled skies of dying worlds. Sleep well, and may the hunt's shadow never fall across your dreams.